Okay, I'm here with Professor Ian Taylor. Please identify yourself.
I'm from the University of St Andrews in Scotland and also a professor at the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa.
Okay, I would like to ask you, you have been now several times at this conference here in Patch. What is your take on the dynamics in terms of African studies in Eastern Europe, right?
Right. So when the first time I came here, the conference was quite limited to a few Hungarian people, a few Hungarian academics. Now what we're seeing is more and more visitors from Eastern Europe or academics from Eastern Europe. And what's quite clear is that African studies is becoming much stronger in Eastern Europe. So as you know, obviously Eastern European countries had very strong links with African countries during the Cold War period. 1990s came, there was really a collapse of interest in Africa by the governments, but also in academic terms, African study centres were closed down in a number of Eastern European countries. And what we're now seeing is almost like a renaissance or a rebirth of African studies in Central and Eastern Europe. And it's actually very exciting. Now we have people from Romania, Slovakia, places which perhaps Western academics might not think that there's any real interest in Africa, but actually there is. There is growing interest, and a lot of the scholars are very, very good. They do field work, and they're reconnecting with the past in some respects to the tradition of African studies in Eastern Europe, which has a very long history actually, going back to the 19th century. And so this conference is a good way to meet these people and to listen to what they're saying and to find out about their research. And a lot of it is absolutely fascinating. For example, yesterday we heard that the Austro-Hungarians tried to have colonial possessions in Africa, which is something which I think probably most people would have no idea about. So these types of things are very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the drivers of this emerging interest in Africa, and also in terms of African studies, this what you call revival or rebirth, what are the drivers, 2 or 3 that you want to highlight, and what are the key questions that drive these debates, the key thematic areas?
Well, I think there's there's 3 main drivers. One is the government who they want more scientific knowledge, academic knowledge about Africa, so they're putting some money into African studies. You then have the academics who are doing it for their own academic reasons and interests, and then you have a third element which is increasingly important, which is the business sector. The business sector who have economic interests in Africa, they need to have knowledge about the continent, which is quite absent in some respects. So, for example, 2 or 3 years ago, I was brought to Warsaw to teach a course to about 25 Polish business people who wanted just a basic background on Africa and how sort of the politics, the dominant issues in contemporary Africa. So yeah, that type of thing.
And the key themes or questions that drive.
So the key themes tend to be focused on the kind of the relationship that Hungary or Poland or whoever has with Africa. But there are also increasing numbers of scholars from Eastern Europe who are doing the type of research that normal Western scholars would or other Western scholars would do. There's, for example, a very interesting project coming out of Poland, which is comparing Chinese investment in Angola and Zambia. There's another project in Hungary is looking at Rwanda as a sort of developmental state. So these are kind of normal, typical academic subjects which are detached or are different from the kind of focus on bilateral relations.
Good. Final question: what do you think is the actual or potential contribution of the Eastern European region to African studies more generally? Is there anything that you see is really can be explained due to the particular experience of the region, the socialist era, whatever?
Well, I think there's two elements. One would be obviously the socialist era, and they're connecting in some respects to that, and that has got quite a strong tradition. And also the fact that these countries are not colonial powers. So academics from these countries will obviously approach the continent from a kind of different historical perspective than, say, the French or the British, or even the Italians and the Germans, because we have colonial baggage, right? The Eastern Europeans don't. And also, like for example, this morning there was a talk given by a Hungarian, and one of the points he made was that Hungary itself was colonized, you know, and Hungarians think of themselves as, in some respects, as a post-colonial country, right? Colonized by the Austrians, of course, then colonized during the Soviet period. That's one way that people have portrayed this. So this brings a very interesting dynamic to African studies as well.
So in sum, then, that this would be just adding more topics, or nuancing the debates?
Both nuancing debates in the sense that you know, they're approaching it from a different historical and cultural tradition, and also adding new topics. And a lot of these topics are really fascinating. You know, the history of Eastern Europe in Africa, either we're talking about during the Cold War, or even nowadays, is very much understudied, or not in these countries, of course, but in terms of being published in English. And so, you know, every day nowadays, if it's not in English, it doesn't count, right? So, unfortunately, there's a lot of material going to be coming out in the next few years, and I think it's fantastic to see African studies developing in this part of Europe. Brilliant.
Thank you.